Should I use the Harry Potter wand or the Corvus one?
The Harry Potter one.
Yeah, the Harry Potter one.
Use Harry Potter? Okay. So it's wonderful to be here today. Thank you very much for having me. I thought I'd start off just by polling you to see what your experience has been like in relation to some cybersecurity challenges. Have you received telephone calls from people saying, "Hi, I'm from Telstra, and there's a problem with your internet"?
No, we're going to cut your internet.
You haven't even cut your internet off.
Unless I don't bother, Telstra does that for me.
Has the ATO rung you to say that they're going to claim your tax returns?
Yes.
I had someone ringing claiming to be from the NAB, and I said, well, I don't accept calls on my mobile for people who say they're from the NAB, I'm going to the local branch. And it's turned out to have been genuine. What they thought they were up to, I have no idea.
But it was good that you had that sense of precaution to realise I'm going to verify. I'm not just going to naively trust. And that's one of the challenges I'll talk about during my talk today, is the danger that our model of our mind, of how the world works and who we can trust and when we can trust people and communications can be trusted, that's being exploited by these criminals. And it's a challenge to educate people to alter their behaviour so that they're not as vulnerable, ideally before they lose a lot of money. So why do we have these problems? One of the reasons for it is the design of the internet itself. Going back through to the 1960s and 70s when it was being built, but some people think it was to protect against nuclear weapons, but it actually wasn't. It was to solve an accounting problem. The US government had built some very expensive computer processing centres with about as much power as you've got on your mobile phone these days. And they were spending a lot of money to fly researchers in and out from different parts of the country to spend some time working on the computers. And they got thinking about this and they said, well, what about if we can connect the people remotely? We won't have to pay for all the accommodation and the flights and the meals. And we could save a lot of money. And that was one of the motivating reasons for why the internet was built. It was to solve an accounting problem. But the people who built it weren't building it from the top down. There was an attempt to do that a while later, and governments around the world got together and they started negotiations and they came up with detailed specifications for a system called OSI. I won't go into all the details of it, but they came up with manuals and each of them had a different colour, so it's known as the rainbow books. The problem was that they hadn't implemented them, and you had these sort of academics who were in places around the world coming up with ideas and building an internet separately to these top-down negotiations. You had a bottom-up development. And when someone wanted to connect to the internet, they faced a problem. Well, the official government standard was there, but I couldn't use it because part of it hasn't been built yet. And I've got this other unofficial system that does work. So which one am I going to choose? They went with the unofficial one, the TCP/IP network as we know it now today. So when the academics who were building this were building it, they trusted each other. And they thought that only good people would access it and use it like them. So they didn't build into the core of the internet issues around trust, privacy, security. It was open, it was free, and that was great for stimulating new users to connect to it. You might remember the days when Telstra forbade you from connecting anything but an official Telstra phone to their network. That's not the case with the internet, and it's stimulated enormous innovation and development. But the legacy of those choices to make it open, to make it easily accessible, that anyone could connect anything to it, is that we face some of these issues around trust today. One of the great things the internet did was to lower transaction costs. So transaction costs, when you think about them, think about the days before the internet. And several of the people in the room are probably of an age where they can remember those days. When I teach my students about this, many of them are not. They don't understand what it was like to have a scarcity of information, to not be able to find the answer to things you wanted easily.
Go to the library.
You could go to the library, yes. The library. And If you wanted to say to book a hotel for a holiday in Fiji, you had to know what hotels could I book, were they any good, you might go to a travel agent, were they open, could you get an appointment with them? So over and above the cost of actually booking the flights and booking the hotel, you had this enormous amount of time and effort searching for information. And that was very costly to them. So most people didn't go on holiday to Fiji. The internet comes along and enables you to search for that information really easily, really quickly, to get feedback, to see photos. So that's lowered the cost of finding the information about the hotel in Fiji. So more people can go to Fiji, which means the hotel has more occupancy, which means they can lower their average cost, which gets more people to come to them. It's a positive feedback loop. So in a myriad of things, in a myriad of different ways, the internet lowered transaction costs. It made our lives more efficient. For good things, like booking a hotel in Fiji, but also for bad things, like criminals being able to find you, being able to steal money from you. So the challenge we face in dealing with the internet is, how do we keep as many of the good things that it gives us, while suppressing the bad things that are harming us? And that's a complex regulatory issue. There is no silver bullet, there is no single answer to that. And it will take a lot of time to develop solutions. And a lot of people won't like some of the aspects of those solutions. So there's a lot of contestation, a lot of political debate about what we should do. Another challenge we face that contributes to the cybersecurity problems you experience is we just don't know how to build software very well. I apologise if anyone is a coder in the room. Some of you are. We've been writing code for about 70 years. And think of it like building cathedrals. In the Middle Ages, when people tried to build cathedrals, stacking one stone on top of another, higher and higher, many times the cathedrals fell over because we didn't really know how to build them very well. Isaac Newton hadn't come along and told us about gravity yet. So our models for how we build code, they're a lot better than they were, but they're still not perfect. So even the best programmer in the world, in every 1,000 lines of code they write, there'll usually be one error. And programs nowadays might have millions or tens of millions of lines of code, which means there's a lot of errors, a lot of potential bugs to exploit. There's also a lot inside those technical issues, there are economic issues. Software developers are under pressure to get code out as quickly as possible. If they work for a startup, they need to rush to market as quickly as possible. So they ship code, once it's written, often before they put adequate time into finding the problems with it. Because debugging code is hard, it's time consuming, it's not as sexy as adding new features. The marketing people are saying, put an extra feature in, don't fix a problem. We can fix that in the update. And so code comes out, and you can't really determine as a user very easily whether that's good or bad, whether it might expose you to a cybersecurity risk or protect you from it effectively. So that combination of technical problems and economic incentives are some of the reasons why you have problems on what I call the supply side of cybersecurity. The programs we use, the hardware we use. There's also the demand side. There might be a bug in a program you're using, but if no one cares to exploit it, it doesn't really matter. So we have to think not just of the supply of cybersecurity threats, we have to think of the demand to exploit them as well. And too often debates about cybersecurity focus just on the supply side. How can we write better code? How can we alter the incentives for companies to spend more time debugging? Let's think about who wants to attack you. There's no single group. There's a whole variety of different interests and different motivations for people who want to exploit cybersecurity vulnerabilities. They might be exploiting it because they want to get your personal information, because they want to know more about you. They might be a competitor, a political competitor who wants to dox you, find out an embarrassing secret. They might be a business competitor who wants to know what your latest products are going to be, what your marketing strategy is going to be. Have you got a cutting-edge innovation that will make your business really profitable? If they can steal that off you, then they don't have to spend the money on the R&D. They can get a head start and beat you to market or compete with you, undermining the investment you expected to get, the return on your investment from doing that work. you've got organised crime. People from around the world who used to spend their days walking down the streets, standing over restaurants and cafes, newspaper stores, etc. Give me some, 10% of your takings or I'll beat you up or burn your store down. You can maybe visit 30 stores a day like that. Whereas on the internet, you could visit 3,000 stores in a day and try to steal money from them. So the scale with which they can steal money has gone up. The probability of being caught has gone down because you can communicate from the other side of the world via the internet. So the jurisdictional history that we have, we've broken the world up into different countries and we govern each country according to its own laws, and we don't tend to enforce the laws of other countries in our own country, often for good reasons, mean that a criminal on the other side of the world can attack you and try to steal money from your bank account, and the probability of them being caught by an Australian law enforcement agent is much lower than it would be if an Australian was to try and do the same thing. Another danger with this, with organised crime getting into cybersecurity attacks, is that they may take some of the profits they make from it and use it to buy political cover in countries which don't have strong institutions to protect against corruption. There's a criminal gang that can get political cover to protect themselves, pay off law enforcement in their own country to not arrest them, is much harder to stop and can continue their operations for much longer. So we have efforts by governments around the world to organise and negotiate treaties to get better cooperation between each other, to try to make it easier to find and identify and arrest a person. But that's not yet a solution that works perfectly. We also have this issue of what's known as attribution. Attribution is where, how do I know who to go after? Who's the person who's causing me the harm? Because sophisticated criminals and nation-state actors will impersonate other attackers. They'll copy their styles, their mannerisms, their language that they write their software code in for the vulnerability that they're exploiting. So you might think, oh, this has got Chinese script in it, it must be from China. Whereas it might have been from Russia, pretending to be Chinese, or vice versa. So attribution is a big challenge in cybersecurity, because if nation states want to claim that someone is causing harm, sometimes they can work that out reasonably well, but often it's a very difficult problem to solve. And this is a particular challenge for businesses. Some businesses have been attacked so often they decide they want to hack back to launch an attack on their attacker. The danger with that is that an attacker might use a front and another company in Australia or elsewhere around the world break into their system and use that system to launch the attack against you. You think you're hacking back, but all you're doing is making the problem of attacks worse, because that company that didn't realise it had been breached, suddenly they're reporting the attack. So there are significant challenges with attribution and with the responses that some businesses and governments propose of launching attacks back to make sure that we're actually going after the right target. Because if you're going to cause harm to someone, you want to make sure it's the right person, not an innocent victim. Another challenge we have is, as I mentioned earlier, the model that internet users have about how the world works and how safe the world is. And we've seen this with an issue called ransomware. Have any of you ever faced a ransomware attack? Had your computers locked up and someone trying to make you pay some bitcoins or something like that to get your data back? One gentleman on the back, please. Yeah. So this has become the number one problem for businesses, along with business email compromises. And the challenge with it is that a lot of businesses thought, I don't need to have really good backups. Some backups, a lot of small businesses, no backups. Because they didn't think that their data systems were vulnerable to being compromised and being encrypted by ransomware. And then along come criminals who are entrepreneurial, and they realise when there are cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, that if you have to make a payment to get your computer access to your computer back by credit card, you can reverse that through the payment systems. The banks will help you. But if you have to send some cryptocurrency to the other side of the world, bad luck, you're not going to get it back. So that's meant that criminals have said, we can make more money with less probability of getting caught by running ransomware. And so they've launched all these attacks, ransomware attack after ransomware attack, getting more and more sophisticated. And a lot of businesses and government agencies around the world have been caught out by it. The National Health Service in the UK, people couldn't get operations because all the computers in the hospitals were locked up. And the health system had to pay the ransom. It happened in the US, the government, city council of Atlanta. Thousands of computers all locked up. The whole local government just ground to a halt. And they had to pay over $1 million in ransom to get their systems back. If businesses, individuals have proper backups, ransomware doesn't become a catastrophe anymore. It becomes a frustration of rebuilding your system and making sure that there's not a compromise that you're putting back into your system, but it's survivable. It's not crippling. Some small businesses, medium-sized businesses, are going broke because they didn't have adequate backups, and ransomware has hit their systems so badly that their business is destroyed. So the model that we have in our mind about what are high-risk and low-risk behaviour, a lot of us have kept that model from the pre-internet world. And the internet has a lot of opportunities, but it also has some threats. And we need to update our model of what we think the world is like to more accurately recognise the risks that we face. That doesn't mean not to use the internet. The internet does a lot of great things. But to try to have strategies or behaviours that minimise the risk of the harms you face. And that requires education, it requires training, and it requires constant updating of that knowledge. Because the criminals are very entrepreneurial. If only they would, run legitimate businesses, they probably would do very well and demonstrate such a great degree of entrepreneurship, but creativity. But for whatever reason, there may be not a lot of jobs in their country, pay may be really low, they may have been, forced to do it by organised crime. They're launching those attacks. And we don't want to lose the likelihood of success in our lives, in our businesses, because of this, if we can avoid it. So what can we do? I've talked about all these problems, and sometimes when I talk about this, people get a few shades paler and greyer. And as I said, adjust our mental models, educate ourselves, not to panic or overreact, and to invest resources appropriately, both by government, by businesses, by individuals, in strategies that can lower the risk for us. Some of that's investing in education, some of that's investing in technology like having a backup system, and then cooperating and sharing our understanding. A lot of people at the moment, if they suffer a breach, get too embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. Their businesses want to keep it a secret because it might harm their reputation if people know that they got hit. But that means that others can't learn from it as easily. So sharing information is critical. And also recognising that you're part of an ecosystem. If your systems are not secure in your business, home, that creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited to attack others who might be trusting you. So you might think, I run a small business, why would anyone ever want to attack my business? But maybe you've got one big customer. Target is a classic example of this. The store in the US, they got hit really badly by an attack. The attacker didn't go straight after Target. The attacker went after their heating and ventilation company, compromised their heating and ventilation company systems, and Target had given that heating and ventilation company a login to Target systems. So the criminal got the legitimate login and logged in as though they were the heating and ventilation company, and then were able to run exploits in Target systems because they had already walked through the front door. So we live in an ecosystem for business, for the internet, and we all need to work together to try to reduce the risks of the harms we face. If we try to solve these problems in isolation, it won't work. How am I going for time?
It's 5 o'clock.
All right, any questions you have?
Interesting
Oh,
what you're
can
saying.
we, sorry, just when asking John a question, just first names and answer the
Okay, my name's Kevin. Before we retired from our business, part of our business was digital asset management. Huge, lots of data being transmitted around the place. When I retired, our systems guys gave me, kept a computer at home so I could finish off some of the things that were not tidied up. Somebody in Holland, tell me if this is the guys were pulling the leg, or somebody in Holland through my computer at home got into our servers and used it to distribute whatever they were distributing worldwide. Is that happening a lot, or?
Yes. There's a concept of distributed denial of service attacks, for example. So if you want to block the traffic, like say a major road here, Pittwater Road, 5 p.m. in the afternoon, usually it's crowded with traffic. Imagine one car breaks down. Traffic jams really, really bad. So how do you create traffic jams on the internet? ATO or things like that. The first day when tax returns can be launched. Surges of traffic. If you can send so much data to someone's server, they'll be so busy trying to process that no one else who's a legitimate customer can get in. It's like someone, if 10 people are shouting in your ears and someone else is trying to have a conversation with you, you can't hear them. So to do that from one computer against someone else's computer, it's really difficult because one computer on its own typically doesn't have enough bandwidth to be able to launch a big enough attack. But if you can have thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of computers in what is called a botnet, then you can launch the attack from all of them against the one computer or one business. And nowadays that's being sold.
They didn't totally close it down. They wanted it open because they used it to distribute those for free.
So sometimes people are wanting to steal your resources. They just want, they don't want to pay for Amazon web hosting. So if they can hack into your server, it's free hosting.
Yeah.
They can do it. The danger is, particularly if you are, if there is a pedophile group, for example, oftentimes they won't be able to get legitimate hosting services. So if they can hack into a legitimate business and use its repositories, its hard disks as their storage space, then it's much harder to detect that it was them. And if police are investigating, they come knocking on your door saying, we believe there are terabytes of child pornography on your computer. You've got to then be able to prove that wasn't us, which can be difficult, expensive and embarrassing. So another reason why being able to control your system so you know what data is on it and that others can't add data, alter your data. Some sophisticated criminals nowadays are tweaking data or inserting false invoices, false employees into accounting systems with the goal of, it's in the data system, just pay the bill. It gets paid out legitimately, no one realises.
You've frightened the life out of me.
I'm sorry about that.
My name's Bernard Schaffner.
Hi, Bernard.
We're about to get electric cars. We are rather behind the rest of the world, unfortunately. I'm involved with electric car and electric locomotives, where the way of operation is controlled by the manufacturer. In other words, if you accelerate drastically every time, the manufacturer will slow you down, and there's no communication other than through the internet. And how will we stop that? They could stop the world. Of course.
So the issue of manufacturer control of devices is a complex one with a myriad of issues. You have farmers complaining nowadays that they don't have the right to repair their tractors anymore because the tractor has got computers in it, and the manufacturer is saying, well, you must bring it to an authorised repair centre, and you can't, which means a couple of days wait. You can't. It might be a relatively simple solution the farmer could do themselves, It's not a problem with the computer, but the computer controls the device, and they're saying for that reason you can't access
They
the
had
tracker.
the diagnostic tools to fix the problem.
But are third parties allowed to sell those diagnostic tools or to
Well,
get
the
third
car
party?
manufacturers do it. I've got a whole arena that comes up with
His name's Paul.
Paul, sorry,
Yeah.
with a continuous error.
Yeah.
And when I look up in the service book, it's not listed there. So when you go on the internet, you find that it's
Con.
a dealer. And the other thing is to get you back there so that they can service your car rather
Well,
than take it to the local mechanic.
That would be an issue that you would certainly want to perhaps take to the Competition and Consumer Commission. But coming back to driverless cars. In the 1920s, or electric cars, in the 1920s, Sydney had electric car charging stations. I saw a picture of one the other day. It was quite fascinating to see that we had those electric cars 100 years ago, and now they're coming back on the roads. The issue of electric car is one thing, that's replacing the petrol motor with an electric battery. Then there's driverless cars. So this is where you're replacing the control of the driver with computers, artificial intelligence, etc. So that's a much more complex and challenging problem. At the moment, how many of you in the room know how to ride a horse? A few people. But a century ago, everyone in the room would have known how to ride a horse because you needed that as your typical means of transport. Not knowing how to ride a horse is not essential to you today. But 100 years ago, people would have laughed if you said you didn't know how to ride a horse. Not knowing how to drive a car in 50 years' time might be the same as not knowing how to ride a horse. In that we've got so used to driverless cars that it's a skill we don't need to have anymore. We choose it as a luxury.
Or it may be illegal.
Or illegal. But a couple of challenges with that. The cybersecurity issues are enormous, and programming issues are enormous. We've seen that GPS signals can be hacked. This is something that came out a few weeks ago. So a transmitter can be attached to a car that will fake the GPS signals so the car thinks it's somewhere else than where it really is. So if your driver's car is driving on its own and it thinks that there's a bend in the road and there's not, it's 50 metres ahead, and it turns you around, that would not be good. Other challenges we've had, to make cars autonomous, driverless, you can either put a whole lot of infrastructure into cities so that they can follow signals, or you can try to use the existing infrastructure like stop signs, traffic lights, and try and detect them. Detecting something as simple as a stop sign, which a 5-year-old can do, is really, really hard for a computer to do accurately. And the best systems that we have today can do it, but then all someone has to do is put a couple of pieces of sticky tape on the stop sign, and it stops being seen as a stop sign. The car will just drive straight through it. So the trust that we can have in our systems that are driverless, there's great potential there. If we can take long-haul truckers off the road so that the pressure's on them for driving from Sydney to Brisbane on the highways every night after 9, and they can spend time with their families and work in other careers, I think that's got great potential. And that's probably one of the first areas you'll see driverless vehicles. Long haul between cities, 1,000 kilometres or so apart. In the city itself, you're likely to see a hub where those driverless trucks will pull into, and then human drivers will do the last mile because it's really complicated to drive on our roads when you're an 18-wheeler. The cars are coming, but there's going to be, humans have accidents. We have a death toll. Humans are not perfect. We make flawed decisions. The question is, does the machine make fewer flawed decisions and result in fewer deaths? I was talking to a car manufacturer, engineer one day, and he said, if we wanted to reduce the road toll to 0, a simple solution we could do. On each steering wheel, we put a 6-inch knife straight towards your chest. And everyone would drive so carefully there wouldn't be another accident. He was being facetious. But there's always risk. Humans have accidents. I had an 18-year-old girl drive through a red light, plough on the driver's side of my car more than 10 years ago. It nearly killed me. So the machines will have accidents. The question is, how vulnerable are they to exploitation, to a hacker? You know, one crazy person on the road maybe killed 20 people in a traditional car. If you could hack 1 million cars, you could potentially take 1 million people out in peak hour. So we need to make sure that when we are rolling out these systems, we adequately measure and accurately measure the risk and the reward, and we make informed decisions about them.
Well, my aim is to convert 1,500 diesel electric locomotives in Australia to be powered, first of all, by hydrogen fuel cells into electric traction.
Okay.
And I want to be able to monitor this from a central point, just like the car.
I'm not an engineer, but I hope you have success with that. Thank you. Question?
I mean, it's Occam's
Sorry, what was your name?
Alan,
Hi, Alan.
software engineer,
Yep.
lots of bugs.
Yep.
I mean, Occam's raised a question is, all this technology will come out, and I fear that it will be the burden of cost is going to end up on the taxpayer to actually fix it up. So how do we ensure that these technologies are not rushed out, and then in Parliament you're having to allocate billions of dollars to fix it?
So this is an idea that's very controversial for software companies. They don't like the idea. In the rest of the world, if you put out a car that has a fuel tank that's in the back that will leak and explode when people drive into the back of you, like the Ford Pinto, you get sued, your reputation gets harmed, and you alter your behaviour. We've used the law of negligence to alter safety in society in a substantial way. That's why there are handrails on stairways. That's why there's non-slip flooring. That's why there's a myriad of safety devices around you every day. And there's a sprinkler probably in the room here somewhere, I hope. Smoking them up there, it looks like there is. So, in software though, if you look at the contracts when you buy software, very typically there's an exclusion of liability. Now that exclusion is not something that we let a car manufacturer or a building developer put in their contracts. They have to be liable for the harms they cause. But software developers, because they were an embryonic or an infant industry, they were given this protection to help them get themselves established. But now that the richest companies on the stock market are Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, they're not your Ford or General Motors or 3M. The question becomes for competition regulators, for society, do we continue to allow software companies and computer hardware companies to exclude liability, particularly when we've got things like the revolution like the Internet of Things coming on with low-cost internet-connected devices that are designed to go everywhere in your life, and developers there rushing them out to market, inadequately secured, people putting them into their lives and not realising the consequences. So the traditional way we've solved that problem is through the law of negligence. That you can release a product with a fault, but if you've caused the harm, you could have adequately taken reasonable steps to prevent it, and you didn't do so, you're going to be liable for that harm. If we start to impose that on software development companies, we might see some alterations in their behaviour, in their investments, time and money, that might reduce some of these problems that we face.
We'd love to see most educated users of the software and within the contract of what we're developing for them. You write into it, a downtime, a failure to perform, and write that into the contract.
That works in business contracts, but not in consumer contracts. You don't get to tell Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever that if their servers go down, they'll compensate you. So the level of consumer protection, we have in the Trade Practices Act or the Australian Consumer Law now, that you may not have clauses of particular types. They will not be enforced by the courts to protect consumers. And perhaps that might need to be extended to software. It's just an idea, it's a controversial one. But
these companies have got incredibly rich in the history on big data and exploiting lack of privacy.
So for them, there's a concept called the privacy paradox. The idea that people say they want privacy, but their actions don't always indicate that they really do want privacy when it comes to the crunch. But that's because humans are not perfectly rational. The model that economists have historically used, that we have perfect knowledge, that we are perfectly rational, they've walked away from that, fortunately, nowadays, most of them, because it's not accurate. Behavioural economics has given us a much more nuanced model of the human mind, that we are what are called hyperbolic discounters. We discount the things in the medium to long term far more and weigh short-term gains far too much. So Facebook or some other software company dangles something shiny in front of you and people go, oh, I'll install that, not realising that the consequences are the extraction of personal information from them, which is then bundled up and sold to advertisers, and enormous value to the company, but all off the free service that people have, and free contributions. And some people are motivated to use social media because they like the social status, they like to show off a version of their life to their friends. It tends to only be the best sort of 2% of their life, perhaps, and they don't show the 98% of life, real life that we all have. But it's getting people to, again, be aware of the harms that can come from a loss of their personal information. It affects politics. Just imagine if Barack Obama had been running for office for the first time and there had been video of him smoking pot or snorting cocaine or something like that from when he was in his student days. And he'd been up against a candidate who was 20 years older, had done the exact same things, but there were no mobile phones at the time, nothing on YouTube. Which candidate is going to get pre-selected? There's a challenge for our democracy in that there's a generation that have overshared information online. And when some of those in their later years decide that they want to get into something like politics, there will be efforts to trawl through social media looking for dirt on them. And some people do, they say, I graduated from university and on the day I walked across the stage, I deleted all my social media history, I tried to cover my tracks as much as possible. That's a difficult thing to achieve. There's a website called archive.org, which goes around collecting pages off the internet and storing them. Search engines have archived copies of things, people store them on their phones, etc. And that's just one example of a problem that people may face. They weren't thinking at the time, 20 years into the future, they were discounting that future too much. They're living their life having fun. But the consequences may be substantial for them. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to interrupt. There's a case in the US of a guy who ran in Iowa 7th for the Republican Party and faced this problem that he'd dressed up as Wookiee from Star Wars and had been posted all over Facebook. And of course his opponent, who was about 20 years older, really pumped the fact that this guy was, unreliable. Would you vote for a Wookiee, basically? And of course what occurred was that everyone then remembered what they were like at college, and he ended up winning by about 5 to 10 points. So
that's a nice outcome. Yeah. Hi Denise.
We've talked about trains and cars and things like that. My 97-year-old uncle recently had a new air conditioner installed, and he was told that the company could monitor his air conditioning use and reduce the amount of power and the temperature of his air conditioner externally. He was horrified, absolutely horrified. He does have the internet, he's very internet savvy, but that's just something really simple. He just found that very confronting, very defensive.
And there are good reasons why the company is saying that, because in peak electricity, peak summer, the surges that can run through an electricity network by everyone turning the air conditioners on can be substantial. But what matters is consent and control and agency, that he could choose whether or not to do it rather than having it forced upon him. And that comes down to the default. What do you choose as the default position? Do you choose the default position to be to enable power and control by the end user? Or do you nudge them into the solution that you want because it's more convenient or it achieves these other goals? And we've seen that with my e-health records, with opt-out being the requirement. And this, I mentioned the privacy paradox earlier. Apparently 25% of the country at least has already opted out, which is an enormous example of where people are saying, I actually do care about my privacy and I will act upon it. And that's quite impressive. Yes?
You did some work on the right to be forgotten.
Yes.
Where did that go eventually?
Sadly, not as well as we had hoped. Part of it was the name. The right to be forgotten wasn't probably the best terminology. We do have some elements of a right to be forgotten in Australia already through what are known as spec conviction rules. That if you've been convicted of a crime and then you commit no further crime for a extended period of time, that you are not going to be, that the record will be expunged or hidden. We also have it in terms of bankruptcy, etc. There's still a bankruptcy register that you've been bankrupt, but your credit history is more restored after the period of bankruptcy has ended, but you'll always remain on that bankruptcy register. So in Europe, we've seen the General Data Protection Regulation come in, and the recognition of the right to be forgotten, or the right of erasure, as it's being called, is a lot more nuanced than people really thought. We tried to communicate this to the general public, but it was difficult to get through to people because everyone's busy living their lives. There's probably 1,000 different issues that are affecting me today that I probably should pay attention to, but I'm too busy living my life to know about all of them. And the same for each person in this room, the different issues that would be affecting us. And that's always a challenge. How do you break through the public's awareness? The right to be forgotten is an interesting balance, or the right of erasure. So if you've done something that was embarrassing and would affect your reputation in the long term, that you don't want to have it deleted off the internet entirely. What you're asking for is a search engine to no longer show it as a result. So if, for example, the Sydney Morning Herald had an article about you where you'd had an argument with your neighbour, something like that, and your picture had been splashed on Herald, exercising a right of erasure is not causing the Herald to take down that article or remove it from its archives. It's saying that Google's search results won't deliver a link to that article if you search on Google. So it's reimposing the transaction cost that you'd have to know to go to the Sydney Morning Herald website and do a search to find the person and find the story about them. You can't just go to one single search engine and easily do one search.
So there's not likely to be any move in the future for people to be able to actually cleanse the record of everything that mentions them.
It would be very difficult to do that, and the right of erasure, the right to be forgotten, has never been about cleansing the host of the data to force them to delete it. Now, in some situations, people have gone to court and sought an order for the takedown of information because it might be defamatory, it might be causing them particular harm.
Or it might be wrong.
It might be wrong. So those sorts of actions have still been taken.
What about the case of sexting or revenge pornography?
Yep. So this is a problem that people, again, have overshared in the short term, thinking, oh, it will help my relationship if I take a photo that's embarrassing of myself and give it to a loved one. That will make us love each other more, supposedly. Not the brightest idea in the world, I don't think, but people are different. So, yeah.
It's a big one, the Monthly Daily, 60, Jason Falinski's office.
So we've recognised that this is a harmful action, and the issue is not the taking of the photograph or the sharing of the photograph in the first situation. It's the onward sharing without the permission of the person who's the subject of the photograph. And that's done for a variety of different psychological reasons. For revenge, as an example of structural sexism, of embarrassment, a myriad of different causes. I believe we made it an offence now to engage in that behaviour, and we're trying to use that as a means of suppressing the volume of the behaviour. The challenge with teenagers in particular with sexting is their brains are not fully developed. We know this from medical studies, and they are not able to accurately measure risk and engage in dangerous behaviour. And this is a modern example of that. So the challenge is always how much of their life do we, in the long term, harm because of an immature action. The difference between an immature action and a deliberate act of revenge. And I think that's one of the challenges that judges will have to face when they are seeing the conduct and determining what sort of punishment should be imposed. And the simplest solution is not to pass on those pictures, not to take the pictures, because they can be stolen off your phone. But again, getting people to be educated, to be aware of those risks is an ongoing challenge.
But if that does happen, how do you determine that?
So it depends on where the content is being hosted. So some of these messages are being sent, just forwarded as MMS from one phone to another. So it's sitting on 50 phones in a school. So you can get the students to hand in their phones and maybe get an IT person to delete them off the phone and erase them. So that's.
But wouldn't it sit on the server, the central? Wouldn't it be sitting on the central server to get it to those 50 phones?
It depends. It depends upon how it's being communicated. So it could be sitting on a Telstra server or something like that. iClouds, yeah. So there's many different ways.
So it's always there.
Let's see if this one turns. We've run out of microphone for those listening in on the video, so I'll raise my voice a little bit. The challenge of removing something completely off the internet is a very difficult task because there are backups being done. There's servers on the other side of the planet you can't get orders against. If someone wants to upload something and make it very hard to take down, they can. But the question is then how accessible is that? How easy is it for someone to find it? So that goes to how much harm will occur. But certainly the person who's had the photo taken of them. Thank you. We're back. The person who's had the photo taken of them will, shared without their permission, will be feeling very violated by that, and that's a very unfortunate situation. So be careful before you start sharing photos of yourself. Yep.
Paul speaking.
Paul.
One of the things you haven't really talked about is the extent to which the internet has intruded on everyone's daily life. And I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Today, whether you like it or not, most people are forced to have a computer with internet connection so that they can do internet banking, they can receive all the bills that the suppliers want to send, and be it the RMS for your e-tag statement or your local bank where electricity or gas authority, and more onus is being put on the individual to accept electronic communication as part of their daily lives. The question is, to what extent can we control this, and how do we, as consumers, regulate this type of intrusion into our lives, and how do we, in the great big environment, have any real control over cybersecurity?
Big questions. Convenience, drives so much adoption of technology in the short term. The post office is struggling because its mail volume is collapsing, because businesses are not sending out advertising through the mail anymore. Businesses are not sending out bills through the mail anymore because they've got this free system called email. Now, postal networks around the world had the opportunity when email was first invented to get control of it and to run it themselves. And they chose not to. I bet they're regretting that decision. We might have had to pay. Just imagine if you had, pay $1 for 100 emails a month. It would reduce the spam you receive, because the spammers exploit free cost of email to send 1 million spam emails You know, the Nigerian princes who were saying, you know, we will send you this money, you won the lottery or whatever. And the reason being is that they only have to find the 1 or 2 most gullible people out of a million. And that's why they deliberately put misspellings into their junk emails like that. Because a person who's going to be smart enough to detect the con and not send them any money will spot the spelling mistakes and they'll select out, they'll delete it. But the person who does respond tends to be so gullible that they are much more vulnerable and much more likely to produce a reward for the criminal. So free email is great when you want to send an email to your children or family members, send your annual Christmas card out by email. But it also means that it can be exploited because there's no transaction cost. So sometimes regulating to introduce a transaction cost can significantly lower the volume of bad behaviour as well as good. I'm not saying we should be paying for our emails necessarily, but you know, we've got spam filters and things like that which are more effective these days. The issue of the internet's intrusion in your life. I agree, I've probably spent way too much time on the internet for far too many years. It definitely does intrude. And there are problems of internet addiction that some people do face, where their access to the internet becomes so much of an endorphin rush. It's like sitting there on a poker machine, pressing a button, you know, it's trained short-term stimulus, the brain gets addicted to it, and it can be a problem. As with all things, it's a matter of self-control and choice. The internet, you know, set times of the day. I'll use the internet between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. I'll check my emails then, and then don't check them again until 4 p.m. And if people can't reach you during that time, well, bad luck to them. You can put in your emails. I only check my emails at this time. That's an option. Issues of receiving paper bills. Now, you know, it's good for the forests that we don't chop down as many trees to produce paper bills, but your record keeping, paper lasts a lot longer than a hard disk. So we have a risk of what's known as the digital black hole from the 1990s through till 2010 or so, where a huge amount of information was converted or only produced in digital form, but not backed up, not preserved for the long term. So historians in the future will find this a problem in 100, 200 years' time, that there's this window where their knowledge of the world is great because it's paper, whoops, drops down, and then it comes back up again.
I think they call that the digital dark ages.
Yeah. So it's it will be a challenge for our society. So each of us has to make a choice, and to make a conscious choice. This is important, not to fall into a habit of just using the internet for the sake of it, one click after another, because you could easily fall in a black hole of YouTube videos or Reddit's posts or things like that. That you use the internet when it's delivering significant positive benefits for you, and when those start to diminish below a certain threshold, stop using it and get on with the rest of your life.
Barry, following on from what Paul was saying, I think we need a right to say no. And it is very difficult to say no.
Yes, and a lot of
they don't accept that.
a lot of businesses
Companies will not accept that.
They're pushing you that, you know, the $1.25 fee to get your statement on paper. Now, perhaps by the post office charges $1 for postage. You've got to print the paper out, buy the envelope. So $1.25 might be the fee, but they're using that as a little nudge, a little transaction cost to say, if you want this, we're going to hit you with that. And that is if you're a self-supported pensioner and you've got 10 investment properties and a few $1 million in the bank, you probably don't care. But a lot of pensioners, a lot of people in society are not in that position, and so this cost becomes significant for them. And that's a distributional issue, that the wealthy don't notice it, but someone who's living on an aged pension as their sole means of support would notice that $1.25 per supplier cost per month or per quarter. Yeah. Yes?
I have decided every time I get told I've won $1 million or inherited $20 million from Nigeria, I now say thank you so much, please donate to children's charity.
Okay, that's good.
But it worries me whether just acknowledging.
Yeah, well, this is one of the challenges. The fact that you respond
Yeah.
tells the attacker that there's someone there and someone paying attention. With the telephone calls that you get, those ones that annoy everyone. Sometimes my wife was saying the other day she got 4 calls within an hour at lunchtime. And a couple of things to be careful of. One is what you say on those calls, because some of the attackers are getting more sophisticated and they're recording the call. What they're hoping for is you say words like yes, because then they can, when they dial into a phone banking system, they can play back your voice saying yes to answer questions.
That's going to.
So you can pretend to be deaf. Say, oh, well, just hang on a minute and put the phone down. If you hang up straight away, the person just makes another call. Whereas if you delay them, every time you delay them 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just go away and do what you like, and then come back, oh, that's interesting, put it down, go away and do things. You can hold them on the line for 15 minutes. That's 15 other people, they're not annoying. You can try to make them less productive. There have been arrests of call centres, scammers in some countries. There was an example in India where there was a whole building, they're making so much money out of these scams, there was a whole building that was being run of scammers, and they arrested the managers, they arrested the staff, I think the call staff. A lot of them are, they're not even aware, at least at first, that they're working for a scammer. They think they're running a legitimate job. And some of them become aware over time and still do it, others leave in disgust. But it's a job that pays them. And when they're desperate, if the choice is living on the streets or doing this, some countries in the world, people will take that because it keeps their family fed. The consequence for us, though, is we get robo-dialed calls with a 2-second delay that's then fed to this call centre and then to pick up to harass you. So, not something we can solve easily except to educate people that if they don't get any money, if they get 0 return on investment, they'll stop doing it. The only reason why they keep calling is because they're getting enough of a return on investment to warrant the cost of running that business. 2 more questions, okay?
We're now in the regime of reportable data breaches, I believe.
Notifiable data breaches, yes.
Who is going to police the fact? We can't necessarily trust some of these organisations to actually report the breaches, can we?
No, that is a problem. There was an issue in the UK where businesses that were reporting breaches, when notifiable data breaches came in first there, after a few quarters stopped doing so. So then the issue of the penalties that failure to report will impose becomes important, and the investigatory powers of the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner become important. Its budget is limited. We have seen the Acting Information Commissioner appointed to a permanent 3-year role now, Angeline Falk, so that's good that we've got a permanent commissioner in place. But yes, the issue of being sure that all of the breaches are being reported is significant, and then ensuring that they're investigated and adequate sanctions are imposed for the harms that are suffered is important. In Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation has brought in explicit rights for class actions. So if a breach occurred with 100,000 people affected, 100,000 people would sign up for the class action. Proof of the actual harm you've suffered is always a problem. So how do you prove that a particular criminal took that data from that breach and used that to steal money from your bank? That's a difficult issue, and that's been a challenge in the US where there have been class actions after data breaches, trying to prove that the harm was caused, or whether there was harm. So the percentage of turnover penalties that the GDPR has brought in, they're likely to only be imposed on the most egregious repeat offenders, so really big fines. But at least it gives the potential for more significant penalties than, for example, the Information Commissioner Office in the UK. I think they were able to impose about a $500,000 penalty on Facebook for the Cambridge Analytica breach. £500,000, which in Mark Zuckerberg's terms is pocket change. So, not really a big alteration of their behaviour. But the new higher percentage of global turnover penalties could be substantial if they're imposed. And that's what we wait to see over the next 5 years or so. Any other questions? I think I've time for one more.
So in that particular instance of the Cambridge Analytica situation, was Facebook being greedy? Was it complicit? Or was it just in the early days of Facebook? And
it wasn't in the early days. Facebook's been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
But part of it was Facebook providing access without and trusting these entities would not exploit the access that it was granting. So it gave too much access to too much data without adequate oversight in terms of the harms that might result from giving that access to third parties who might not act nobly or honourably with the data once they got it. If you let someone walk into the bank and the vault's open, and you let them walk out, you've given them access, you've got permission to walk into the bank vault, but if they've stuffed a few gold bars in their back pocket as they walked out each day, and you didn't check, that's on you for failing to have adequate systems.
So the problem is, Facebook took the dollars over their own overall headaches.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One last question.
I was just wondering, have there been any cases yet of children suing their parents over sharing photographs of their entire life on social media?
This is something that's likely to come in the future. That the issue of, and I've got friends who put photos up of their kids pretty much every day from the day they were born, and that child could never consent to it. Now they are under the control of their parents while they're a child, so their ability to consent is an issue. The issue of what harm they've suffered, the total transparency when they didn't ask for it, is likely to become more an issue as the children reach teen years, as they start to develop more agency themselves. At the moment, those children are not necessarily aware of what's been going on. So I'm not aware of any actual cases yet of that action. We do have cases of children suing parents for stealing their identity, taking out credit in the child's name. Yeah. Identity theft by people you know is an issue. And I was telling one of my colleagues about this the other day, and he was a computer scientist, and he was horrified by the idea. He couldn't conceive that some parents would steal their children's identity and run up huge debts in the child's name. But I sent him some links to a few cases where it occurred, prosecutions. And
Isn't that what we're doing at the moment, spending money that we haven't got?
I'll leave that to the politician to answer.
So that was a nice segue, and the answer is we've started paying back that debt, so don't worry about it. The other issue that was raised about right to paper statements, so the federal government is moving through that at the moment, and I think where we'll land, and I'm not sure, is that possibly people who are over 55, for example, will continue to be able to access paper-based statements free of charge. And I'm the chair of the Tax and Revenue Committee, and one of the big issues we faced was availability of paper-based tax returns, which obviously the ATO, for cost reasons mostly, would like to get rid of. And we've basically just recommended that they continue to be available for the foreseeable future. But look, the truth is they will get at some point phased out, but probably not in the next few years. But on that note, I would like to thank Dr. Selby for coming today, this evening, and entertaining all of us and not scaring us silly. That was very nice of you, thank you. And I do have a bottle of wine to thank Dr. Selby for his time and effort. I think he's earned it as well. So. And when is our next lecture? Okay, we'll let you know by email shortly. Okay, so set your spam filters so the email can get through.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. See you.